Welcome to Off the Post. I'm Russ Cohen. We've got Anthony Mingione. And how are you?
It's a fine summer day here in Philadelphia. Russell, how are you?
Yeah, so far it's cool. It's going to get muggy. You know that. And we have Michael Jello. How are you?
I hate the friggin' heat.
You hate the heat. You hate the cold. Like, it's just the way you
little
are.
Ball of hate. He's a little ball of hate.
He is.
I'm not Ed Verbeek, no.
And we have special guest Chris Johnston on, NHL insider from The Athletic and the Chris Johnston Show. Chris, how are you?
I'm good. Bring on the heat. Bring on the summer. Love the slow vibes going these days in July.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so CJ, first question is the Montreal Canadiens. They get Noah Dobson. They get Zach Bolduc. I think this team could take a step that they didn't take last year in the playoffs. Like, I think they're going to be overlooked in a way. I don't know. What's your feeling? What's the feeling in Canada about them?
You know, I think there's real debate there about that team. I mean, if you look under the hood a little bit with what Montreal did last year, there's some signs that maybe, a lot went their way that might not go their way, in the next season. But for the reasons you mentioned, their players that are driving the success are likely to get better. I think just because of their age, they're still a pretty young team. And, I do really like the Dobson acquisition for them. And so, I'm not sure where it's going to fall. I know internally they would like to add at some point another forward. Not saying necessarily that has to happen, before the start of training camp or the regular season. But, I think that they understand they need to maybe try to find a second scoring line in time here. But big picture, this organization's in a really great position. I think that, the work that they've done since Hughes and Gorton have taken over the front office have put them on a really nice trajectory. And so, where they end up next season, I mean, they're certainly going to start the year with playoff expectations, but, it'll be interesting to see how they handle those. The other part of it is, so much of that success was driven by young players. How do they handle expectations a second time around? I think that's probably where this will net out. But, I do believe they're going to continue to be reasonably aggressive in trying to find help up front. It's not easy. There's not a plethora of obvious top six options that are out there to trade for, but certainly any names that pop up, I expect the Canadians to be in on them.
CJ, now that the Mitch Marner telenovela is over with and he's wending his way westward to play in Sin City, the Toronto Maple Leafs have a 102-point gap to fill. They did it partially, and Russ and I have debated about how successful Matthias Maselli will be. They had Nicolas Roy in the swap for the sign and trade with Marner, so they've made up some of it. There's been talk about Jack Roslovic. There's also been talk about Max Domi moving up to the top line. I almost get the feeling here this is sort of subterfuge for the real intention of Brad Treliving, which is Easton Cowan making this team. And but they don't want to put too much pressure on a 20-year-old kid coming right out of junior to fill that spot. What do you think the prospects are of them signing Roslovic, or what do you think that they're doing leading up to the beginning of training camp?
My sense in Toronto is that they're actually comfortable being, that they don't need to be too aggressive. Roslovic makes some sense because, he's available. There's not a lot of names left on that UFA board. But, I think that the price and where that fits in will dictate what happens. I mean, the other thing that probably it's not a sexy conversation, but the Leafs are counting on Austin Matthews to have a better season as well. And, hopefully for his sake, a healthier season where he's able to be at his best. And so, I don't sense that there's urgency that they have to go out and find, the 102 points that get left behind with Mitch Marner. I think that there's a case to be made with more opportunity for other players in this lineup, that internally some of those solutions will present themselves. And then over time, Brad Treliving is a pretty aggressive GM when it comes to trades. I could see them, looking to fill some of the holes, maybe even as the season gets going. I don't know that they want to force anything right now. I mean, the biggest issue probably that the Leafs have is they don't have a whole lot to trade in any trade. That they've right. Emptied the draft pick coverage pretty good the last few seasons. I'm not sure they want to trade someone like Easton Cowan, which of course any meaningful conversations they'd be having with teams around the league would involve the team's top prospect. And so, I think that they're content to be a little bit, laying in the weeds here because, one thing they haven't had for years and years and years is cap space. They do have a bit of cap flexibility now. I mean, they traded Ryan Reeves out this week. I'm not convinced both David Kampf and Kalle Yarncroke will be back when the next season gets rolling. And so, there's a bit of wiggle room for the Leafs to actually add salary, which is not a position they've been in too often the last few seasons. So, I think that they're going to probably be a little bit patient entering the season, and then just see A, how it develops, and B, what might be out there on the trade market leading into the trade deadline.
Chris, the Flyers had an obvious checklist in their offseason acquisitions, and there were some certainly that were a little surprised at decisions. Certainly, I think Flyer fans were initially taken aback by the cost on Christian Dvorak. I feel like in many ways, there's this feeling that Danny Briere is trying to deal with two opposing forces. There's one side that wants the Flyers that maybe tank for Gavin McKenna, and then there is a time to get competitive crowd. My feeling on the team is that they already have young talent to build around, and having a competitive environment is better for their development than trying to be bad enough to get a McKenna lottery ticket. But I want to get your take on where you think things are with the Flyers on their current track.
Yeah, I think they've left themselves some optionality, right? I mean, their internal view, which I'm sure Ant, is that they don't want to tank. I mean, this is not a front office that is actively trying to do that. I think that they understand the perils of it. They understand their market. They want to energize that fan base again. And they do have some really nice young players, I think, to get excited about. So by no sense do I get the feeling that they're looking to do that. But if the season doesn't go so well, and even the Dvorak contract was a 1-year deal, they've left themselves the ability as that year goes along to strip parts away again, to be a team at the trade deadline that's selling off some pieces, and in the process of that would probably find themselves falling back in the standings. So I'm with you. They're not all in on this playoffs or bust. Obviously, I think there's still a recognition that there's there's a bit of a process that has to play out with this team still. But at the same time, you can only sell the bottom of the standing stuff in any market too long, and I think that, quite honestly, the Flyers want to be aggressive as time goes along and take big swings, the way we remember this organization doing a lot over the years. So I don't see them being, just sit on their hands, plan on losing, hope that things go well in the lottery type of team. I think that they're going to be out there pretty active as the year goes along. So, to me, it's not a tanking situation, but if everything goes sideways in the first year under Rick Tocchet, maybe they look to do that as the year goes on.
CJ, the New York Islanders are kind of interesting to me. I felt like they had a great draft. So there's that. Matthew Schaefer's on the team. Noah Dobson's not. Okay, we'll see how that part goes. That might work out. They get Jonathan Drouin. They get Maxim Shabanov. I don't know. I think, and I give Patrick Roy credit, I wasn't sure he was going to stick out the job this time because he hadn't in the past. What do you feel? Do you feel like they're going to contend because Barzal's healthy now? I feel like they are going to contend to some degree. I don't know. What's your feeling on that?
Well, they certainly had some options. They had a lot of calls on Pajot, on Barzal, on Horvat. Other teams wondered, was this going to be a sell-off there? And Matthew Darche, in his first now month or so on the job as general manager, has signaled he doesn't want to do that. I mean, he was in a unique spot with Dobson where either he was signing him to a contract that was something like $10 million a year, or he had to trade him at this point in time because he was 1 year from UFA. So, I don't think we should confuse that with a strip down, even though it was a future-minded trade, obviously the one they ended up making, but it wasn't necessarily a signal of the overall direction of the organization. And so, they feel that they can be a team, that can surprise a little bit, because I think they're going to be a little under the radar entering the season. Last year felt like kind of a lost adrift year for that organization, but they don't intend to be bad, and they are not looking to trade some of those players that I think other teams have already inquired about and will continue to until they know for sure that they're not being moved. So I agree with you. I mean, it's weird because they never really did a rebuild, right? Under Lou Lamoriello, I mean, that was a criticism is they kept rolling with older players. They never fell to the bottom of the league. They had some unexpected success during those pandemic years with back-to-back conference final appearances, but those are getting a little distant in the rearview mirror. I think it's going to take some time for Matthew Darche to really assess what he has. It's almost like, to me, this is a season where you just watch it play out, see where it is, and then let's see what his posture is leading into the draft next year. And does he feel some of those players like Barzal, maybe it's best to move on from them and get younger. I don't think that he has that answer today, other than they have not gone out there and said, hey, we're looking to make big decisions right now. I think they're going to see if those combinations of signings can put them in a position where they're at least pushing for a playoff spot again next season.
CJ, right here in River City, the Buffalo Sabres continue to be head-scratching, especially to their own fan base. We know 14 years without the postseason. There seemed to be some heat to them, having to do things to get into the playoffs or be more consequential. And in this offseason, they made 2 depth moves, Justin Danforth and Alex Lyon. And in my estimation, they lost the trade with JJ Peterka, even though we know he wasn't going to re-sign there, or, there was an offer sheet possibility. With the Sabres, over the last 4 years, they've given up the best player in almost every deal. And I don't know how much longer. I mean, the fan base, it's gone basically from anger to apathy. And I don't think they got any better this offseason. So, I mean, how do you read this situation in Buffalo? I mean, the Bowen Byram thing is hanging over their head. What's your read on that? But what do you think overall, what's going on in Buffalo right now?
It's a concern at the league level. I think that's it's gone on so long where they have been kind of mired in whatever we want to call this as, mediocrity, something worse than that. It's not good for the league as a whole, quite honestly, to have a team, where the fans have shown over a lot of years, that's a real hockey city, and you're eroding some of that passion and that interest level that you're talking about there, Mike. I don't know how to read just this one set of moves in the offseason. I mean, certainly it would be hard for me to sit here and argue they're better. Maybe you're standing on the fact that you think that they can perform better with largely the same players next season, that something last year can be corrected. It's just hard to have that trust or faith, right? Because you haven't seen it. And it's, we're not talking about a 3-year bad stretch or a 5-year bad stretch. And we're not talking about one coach or one GM. I mean, this is stretched on for so long that you wonder what it's going to take for them to get out of it. And, the kind of real head scratching part is they've had a lot of good players through Buffalo. It's not that every, draft decision has been poor. They just haven't been able to A, put it together, and then B, convince some of those players that it's a good idea to stay. So in terms of where they go, I don't have that answer. I'd probably be a rich man if I knew how to get them out of this. If I could sell Terry Fagul on a plan, he's probably looking for one right now. With Bowen Byram, that situation seems semi-untenable. I mean, there's certainly a path now that the arbitration track is there where they can sign them short term and sort of delay the pain, delay the decision. But I mean, you're still going to be in the same spot either 1 or 2 years from now, depending on the length of that award. If they end up going through arbitration, the one thing it does is it sets a deadline. I haven't seen the schedule yet for the ARB hearings, but whenever it comes out some point here in the next couple of weeks, he's going to have an ARB hearing schedule, and that forces either a trade or maybe a longer term contract, what have you. But they need to find something there, and I the question is so fair, but I honestly don't know what the direction is going to be. I don't know where they're going to be. I mean, saying everything I've said, I still look at the team and there's a lot to be encouraged about. If we remove the Buffalo logos and the name, and I just showed you that roster, I'd certainly not a bottom of the league roster by names, but it's I don't know where they go. Honestly, it's such a hard situation to make sense of, and I feel for you being there every day. I mean, how do you cover a team like that? Because you almost get to the point where they haven't earned any benefit of your doubt. Like, it's hard to believe in anything they're selling, but at the same time, logically it has to get better at some point. But they've not yet had an offseason to this stage that I could say, okay, this is going to move forward. I mean, we'll see what Kesselring is. I mean, that was a big part of that bet in the Peterka deal. And I know he's a player some teams really like out there. So, the truth is they've still got some work to do this offseason, Byram being first, but I think they've got to find some other pieces too.
Well, here's the thing about the Byram situation that I don't think it's not lost on us, but Darren Ferris is his agent. And now that it was team elected salary arbitration, Darren Ferris can say, okay, I want a 2-year deal. And that walks him right to UFA. And as we know from the Marner scenario, and as we know from, Sam Bennett, Darren Ferris likes to carry a player to free agency. Any team that's trying to trade for Bowen Byram after an arbitration award is going to say, well, I'm only going to have this guy for 2 years. I'm not going to give you full value for Bowen Byram if I think he's a top pairing defenseman, because Darren Ferris is going to say, I'm going to take him to free agency no matter where I'm going. So I think their situation here is, if they're going to move him, they better move him before the arbitration hearing, because then the other team has a chance to sign him to that long-term deal. I don't think he's signing an 8-year deal in Buffalo. I don't think Buffalo is going to pay another defenseman big money like they're paying Dahlin and Power.
Right. I think you've got that situation nailed, because the other problem is, let's say he has a 2-year arbitration award, a team trading for him can't sign him till next July 1st. So you're going to be it'll always be in the back of your mind if you're the GM on that side of the deal, even if the agent says, oh, he's going to love it here. Like, you just don't know how it's going to go. And then maybe you get to July 1st next year and he doesn't want to do, like, you're basically, if you're going to get the most for the asset, whatever that ends up being, the Sabres need to trade him when the other team knows he's signing long-term, right? I mean, that was the key to the Dobson-Montreal deal, essentially, is he was getting an 8-year contract. So Montreal is willing to pay a little bit more in that deal, because they know that they have a player locked up for all his best remaining years in the NHL. I think it has to be the same circumstances with Byram. I do believe that there are places that he signaled that he would be open to that kind of conversation, but they haven't got there yet, right? And there was so much smoke, on July 1st around a possible offer sheet in his situation. That goes out the door when you have the arbitration filing. But, these sides need to work together. Or the Sabres, really, I think the onus is on Buffalo here to work with Byram to see this to a good conclusion, because if they don't, I just think that the value of him as an asset is going to decline here, as they lose that kind of control. So, it's probably the most pressing situation around the league. I mean, there's other players I believe might be traded, but there's maybe not the same urgency. But because of that arbitration sort of hang up, they've got to make some kind of decision here within the next 2 weeks.
Chris, last question for me. I wanted to ask you, there was a fascinating development with the CBA about the provision that's going to allow NHL teams to assign one 19-year-old CHL player to the AHL starting in the 26-27 season. I know it's something that they're seeking. It's not set in stone. It's set in stone. So do you think that the CHL might push back and try to negotiate something to kind of protect themselves, especially since they're dealing with an existential crisis kind of with the collegiate exodus?
Yeah, I mean, we're in such a fascinating time. Like, basically what we'll call the hockey development years, everything is being shaken up, right? Between players now able to go to the NCAA from junior. You're going to see some players leave NCAA schools and go to the OHL because maybe their jobs are being taken or their roster spots are being taken by this. I don't think anyone knows for sure how it's going to shake out. The one thing I have been told is the CHL is not necessarily as opposed to this as you might think. Mm-hmm. Because first of all, it's only one player that you're talking about per organization. So, granted, when it's that player, it's going to be a player that would have been an impactful player in the market of the CHL team he was playing for. Largely, you're talking about the most, some of the best guys at the age where they tend to dominate in that league. But, they do believe that doing this might actually be a path to keep players in the CHL longer. That if you're a 17-year-old and hey, I'll play one more season in the OHL, get drafted, and then maybe I can play in the American Hockey League, if not the NHL, that it might, in a strange way, be a retention model down the line for those players. The truth is, though, I don't think anyone knows for sure how this is going to develop over time. I mean, I feel like you need to see almost like a 5-year cycle. How do the best players navigate this? What do the schools do? What do the CHL teams do? And then obviously, once the NHL teams gain the ability to put a 19-year-old in the AHL, how do they manage this? But I do believe it's going to happen. There's been a lot of discussions between all these various stakeholders over years and years here. And I think that there's an understanding that the model itself needs changing. How those negotiations look with the CHL, what maybe guardrails get put on that rule, I guess remains to be seen. But
right? How often you're allowed to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And is it, there was some talk it might only be first round picks you can do it with. Right. Now it seems like it's not going to be that. So, look, the change is already you almost like you can't stop it now, right? The toothpaste is out of the tube. We're seeing Gavin McKenna and other top prospects go down to the NCAA after playing in junior. And so the CHL, you're right. It's something of an existential crisis, but I still believe that's going to be a good route for a lot of players to have good pro careers. You lose some of the best either to the American Hockey League or the NCAA in the process, but I don't think the league's going to fold up shop or anything just because of this set of rule changes.
Well, listen, CJ, thanks so much for coming on. Enjoy the first place Blue Jays. Hey, enjoy the summer
while you can.
I mean, look, Mike was good. I didn't hear from him once there when the Jays were in the process of sweeping the Yankees.
You will, though. As the season rolls on, you will hear from him.
They're coming back in about 10 days, and I'll be there for one of the games, and hopefully it'll be a Yankee sweep of the Blue Jays this time around.
I was going to say, if the Yankees were sweeping the Jays, I probably would have heard something from him, but he was pretty quiet there a couple of weeks ago.
He knows how to be quiet when he needs to be quiet, Chris.
Thanks, CJ.
Have a great day, guys.
Take care, Chris. Thanks.
All right, so let's talk about everybody's favorite subject, the decentralized draft.
Oh, yes.
Now, here's the funny thing. And it wasn't just I was just hearing that it was going to change. Everybody was hearing it. But then I have to admit, one or two people at the draft said, what if these guys just decide they could refine what happened at the draft this year and try it again? And I was like, nah, that's not going to happen.
This is what I call it, Russ. This is what I'm going to say. And I said this earlier. The GMs need a larger sample size. Conveniently, they want a larger sample.
I think it's deeper than that. I think it's
I know.
I think it's the owners pushing the GMs. I don't think there's enough GMs that actually want this. I think the owners are pushing the GMs.
I think it may be a bit of both. It depends on the dynamic too between the ownership group and how much power that president of hockey ops / general manager has with the organization. I think that's definitely going to be a big part of it. I get them trying to give themselves at least one more year with this model. The thing is, the more they do it, the more likely it is that they're going to stick with it. And that comes now to a conversation of, and quite a few of our colleagues have said this, the draft tends to be the one place where we have an industry, almost, I don't want to say a convention of sorts, but it kind of is. It's a meeting place for people. It's also the opportunity for everybody to be able to talk. And, you also get a lot more information. The prospect guys get information from the guys covering the pro teams directly, the NHL writers. It's just AHL, CHL. Everybody has this opportunity. Is almost like an industry-wide thing. The draft tends to do it. We can say, oh, well, the All-Star game does. I was like, yeah, but not everybody's traveling midseason to the All-Star game, whereas a lot of people end up trying to come to the draft in this case for those opportunities to make, to get connections and to do all of our jobs better.
Yeah.
I think more than anything is everybody becomes more informed because of the connections that are made there. And therefore we as writers on all levels are able to serve the people who read our stuff.
Well, and ultimately, this is a failure of Gary Bettman in terms of hurting the Cats, because I'm sorry, he was embarrassed by the way that the draft was carried off. You could tell by the look on his face in Los Angeles that this was a cluster bleep. And, he has herded cats before in terms of CBAs, in terms of other things that some of the owners didn't want. This was an embarrassment to the league, and everybody thought, oh, they can't bring this back again. Well, you don't realize some of the stupidity of some of the owners and the intransigence of some of the owners to do something stupid and to stick with something stupid. So
yeah, but I would also say at the same time, the counter to that, Mike, is also, I do understand people or ownership and production and ESPN and whoever else is involved wanting to get at least one do-over, that it's not one that it would for them, like, give us a chance to make it better, especially when it comes to the first round. That was one of the biggest problems, was the amount of delays that were happening. It wasn't a friendly production for anybody that was involved. That was the problem. And we spent time over an hour plus on a draft that is normally finished sooner than that. Fans are just going to, begin to lose interest at that point.
But here's what I want to say. I was backstage, right? So I went into the ESPN truck. I was at the Nerve Center.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what they pulled off logistically was near impossible to even pull off. Like, nobody had ever tried to pull off something like this with all the telecommunications that had to occur, and it's a lot. Like I saw the screen that everybody was on, and how they were doing it, and I think they'll improve on that. I think the issue is teams don't realize, and maybe I need to speak to the owners on this. You're losing on branding. You're losing on branding these players because you're getting less publicity for your players to help brand your product, to help sell tickets.
Yeah,
that's something I think that's
they're going to counter and say those players are going to end up invariably getting to their camps. The problem is you lose that sort of window of marketing those prospects. Yes. And this is the problem, is that by the time we get to speaking with them, other than in a Zoom press conference, which we all know everything, whether you like it or not, with a Zoom press conference, it's like an extra barrier that doesn't allow. And then you're waiting until developmental camp after free agency's already started, and you lose the momentum of being able to have stories early enough here to be able to get people really to get maybe certain questions that would be interesting. And there's something to be able to say for reading body language is so much better, obviously, in person than you're going to see on Zoom.
And this is going the exact opposite of what we thought we were going to give. Because remember, and I'm not ripping on Elliot Friedman for this report, because there were a lot of other people who were saying the same thing.
A lot of us heard it.
That the direction was going to be a baseball winter meetings type of scenario, where it was going to be the awards, the NHL draft, and the beginning of free agency all in the same place. That would give you that sort of convention type of feel where everybody's in the same place and there's no rush to get back to your individual cities. And you have the development camp in the second week of July instead of having it on June the 30th through July the 3rd, when nobody wants to be there because it's Canada Day in Canada and it's July 4th in the US. You can wait a week. But, all I know is I think this is a disaster. I think that they made a mistake. They need to double down on the mistake, and that's what they're going to do. And then we're going to have the same conversation next July when it's a disaster again, that we should go back to.
That's the thing, but at the same time, they're going to have that sort of second. They're going to know beyond a shadow of a doubt whether this thing's going to work or not. And at that point, I think we'll know very quickly whether or not they're going to continue with it.
Right. It's about the money savings, really.
You're absolutely correct. The money savings is absolutely going to be.
We can talk about production values and all these other things. It's about the money.
And the sad part is, it's going to be. You're right, Russ. And the sad part's going to be is that, I think it was our colleague Charlie O'Connor bringing up. It was almost like, if this is the reason why owners are doing it, and I said, and I thought in my head, I didn't post this, but I was like, hey, they're just going to be just like some Major League Baseball owners.
Yeah. All right.
You got no Major League Baseball's going so great, but anyway.
We'll do some quick team stuff. I mean, Ant, is there anything else Flyers-wise that you feel like we didn't bring up on this show?
I think in this circumstance, the bases are pretty much covered. We need to see, obviously, what the Flyers decide to do. And again, the big thing, I think everybody, if you're wondering where the Flyers may be going for the remainder of the summer, whether or not they make a decision to bring in an outside help to account for the Tyson Forster injury,
which I think is probably
or are they just going, or as what we think the indications have been, they're going to give Alex Bump every opportunity to make the Flyer roster, and they feel confident in that in putting him in. And again, he looked great in developmental camp, but I think that's going to be the big question if they have any opportunities to move off of. Obviously, with Rasmus Ristolainen's contract, but I don't, I
don't think they can do it.
I don't think they're going to do. I don't think, especially while he's still recovering from the injury.
They could move off of Nick Delorier. They could buy him out.
Delorier is a possibility in this case. We'll see.
San Jose.
Well, not now. That went out the window. Maybe they'll send him to Toronto.
Well, no, but hold on. Let's talk about that for a minute. We'll spin it into the protector thing. We heard that last year.
Randy was asking additional centers for Flyers. No, Randy, because I think at this point now you're committed. You're already committed to trying Zegras as a top six center, right. And you've just spent $5.4 million on Christian Dvorak, who is not a fourth line center.
He'll be.
He says he's not a fourth line center. In addition to that, you have Cates, you have Rodrigo Abels in this circumstance, who's good on draws. No, I don't think, Randy, there's going to be any additional centers for the Flyers. I think they've made their moves.
No, but let's talk about the protector aspect, and because last year we heard before the season started, the Flyers were like, Nick Delorier is here to protect Matvei Michkov. Yeah, that doesn't really happen. And so Ryan Reeves, is he really going to protect the young players of San Jose? No, because he's going to be on the ice for like 5% of the time.
I'll push back on one thing here.
Go ahead.
The reason why we say that with Delorier and was like, not really, is because you have a much better version of a protector in Garnet Hathaway. Hathaway's a different kind of player, but he's willing to drop. He will go in and physically engage. Yeah. So in that circumstance, so the question is, in San Jose, who do they have? Philly at least had two options there, which one option was much better than the other.
I don't believe it stopped cheap shots at all. I
don't think it stopped cheap shots at all. I think they are. San Jose is in. I'm watching what they're doing right now, and yes, Mike, you're absolutely correct. They're making many of these contracts are signed to get them above the floor, no question. But I do think they're in that sort of nascent state of they're trying to pepper the lineup with veterans.
Right.
With the younger players. And I do think maybe in the back of their head, they're kind of hoping that they're going to be a more competitive team, that they're going to be up the ladder much further this season, and that some of those additions, I like the Gaudette signing. I thought that was actually pretty good. But having that option of if you need to throw in Ryan Reeves against another team, again, it's a tool. The question is, how far back in the toolbox is that tool to be used?
Well, tool is the right word. But honestly, I look at it and says, okay, the shortcomings of Ryan Reeves mean less for San Jose because San Jose isn't going to make the playoffs or has long odds of making the playoffs. So him being a liability on your fourth line, which he was, and that was the laughable thing about his comments going out the door in Toronto is that, let me just make the quoted, just a lack of trust. I had one bad game and I was out of the lineup for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games. Okay. The lie here is that
my question is,
you had a good game. You didn't have
a better question. What's your definition of a good game, Ryan? Yeah. You had a fight? Oh, congratulations.
Oh, wait. That means you had one friggin' good game last year because you only fought once. Once. Well, that was your job. And that's all you did at one.
He's preparing. I'm sure he's preparing right now for a career in media before long. But I will say the timing of that too was also, Mike, was that he said this was a conversation he had with Treliving towards the end of the season, and that he's just kind of relaying where things kind of went after that. So there's a part of me that was kind of like, okay, I'll throttle back just a little bit on the comments, but the idea that you had quote unquote, what my question then is. So how do you define? My question is, what was that good game? Like define it to, if I'm not understanding what the good game is, how do you define what the good game was?
His good game is what he wasn't -3.
Okay.
But let me just say, I've had some comments from people like, well, they traded him because he was disloyal because he sold Mitch Marner on Vegas. Mitch Marner was going to Vegas or was going out of town, no matter what.
It's narrative. It's a convenient narrative,
right? But I'll just say this, for a living. I don't know if Henry Thrun's going to be a success in Toronto, but it's a good bet to bet on.
It's a lottery ticket. If he turns into something, it's a great
24-year-old defenseman, smart kid, was at Harvard for 3 years, big. He's not, he can move the puck. I mean, he's probably going to be their number 7 this year.
No, he's a good pickup.
He steps in. It was a good pickup. I think it's a.
They just said San Jose has a log jam on the blue line, and this was how they decided. And again, if they're looking at Thrun as a tweener, maybe, and right now, and in Toronto, again, we'll see what happens here with the Leafs as well. I'm kind of feeling that way about Thrun. That being said, that piece is still infinitely more useful than the role Ryan Reeves had in Toronto.
Yeah, and I want to point out this. For it being said that Pizzetta is a younger, cheaper Reeves, the Canadians barely ever played Pizzetta. The only reason he played is because they had shortages in the minors for someone to bring up. That was the only reason. He's actually less talented.
Pizzetta was given a 2-year deal so he could sneak down through waivers to the Marlies. He's a one-way contract. I would be shocked if he makes the Leafs. There's a better chance of Jacob Quillen.
Emergency call. He will be for the Leafs. He's a classic emergency call-up. That's what he'll be. And you know what? And he knows exactly what his role will be. And there won't be any arguments with Treliving about a good game or a bad game.
Right. You call him up when you're about to play the Florida Panthers, and you say, sick balls, and he goes after Sam Bennett or something like that.
Right.
That's it.
Do I put that as our subtitle for the show today, Mike?
No,
Don't.
with the Athletics, Chris Johnston, not sick balls.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Last thing. Johnny Reddit asked about Mike Sullivan keeping Mika Zibanejad at center, and he went go visit him. And Mike Sullivan's trying to make the best of a bad situation, because I think the Rangers still want to move Mika Zibanejad, but he's in the driver's seat now. It doesn't mean they can't force him out, because they've done that before. So I think they're still going to try and move him. So Sullivan has to do what he has to do. He's going to try and keep the resource if he can. But if he loses them, he's not going to lose sleep over it. Like he's in his first year. So it's a weird situation, guys.
Yeah, I think that the Rangers are going to have about as much success getting Mika Zibanejad to waive his no-move clause as Toronto will be to get Morgan Riley to move his no-move clause. He signed it. He wants to stay in New York. If it becomes untenable. Now, that's the thing, Russ. I don't think, like, all of a sudden, if he continues to play up and down like he did last year, are they really going to destroy him so much that he's going to want to leave New York? No, I think he'll just stay there. They can't do anything. They can't buy him. They can buy him out, but they're
not going to buy him out.
They're not going to buy him out. They can't send him to the minors. They can't, they can't do anything. And with Morgan Riley, he's not going to Calgary for Nazem Kadri as much as Randy would probably like that to happen. That's not going to happen. So,
and also to answer the other question, I believe Artemi Panarin will re-sign with the Rangers. He wants to be there. He's always wanted to be there. I don't expect him to ask out or not re-sign.
I don't think there's going to be a situation. I mean, sure, there could be opportunities and situations. I think New York is still very much in their window. I think it's important to do things correctly this year. For Chris Drury, I know there's been a lot of discussions about how things were handled last year, and there's been a lot of agents saying this year how Drury's actually handling things much, much better this year. Maybe lessons were learned in terms of realizing that the way maybe that things were handled, you don't always go full ruthless on everything, and you have to read your room better. So I feel like also having a Sullivan there who has that, and as much as I liked Peter Laviolette as a head coach, I do feel like his window is always going to be
I agree.
Exceptionally short, and his ability to, I don't want to question this, but you do it so many times and the message is sent so many times. After a while, people and if you can't manage that, things kind of fell apart.
But the Rangers are less talented. That's going to be their battle. They're less talented than they were before.
I just wonder, and we'll be talking about this all year until one or both of them sign. Which is going to be the more dramatic of the two prospective free agents going into next summer? Connor McDavid or Kirill Kaprizov? And I talk about Kaprizov in connection to the Rangers because they just seem to be Russian central now.
Yeah, none of them are going to be free agents. That's the answer, because we learned that from this summer is that they're all re-signing now with the extra money the teams can now overpay to keep these guys.
But Russ, as everybody's saying, they may re-sign, but with the cap going up as much as it is, they're not re-signing 8 years.
No, but they're going to re-sign.
They may re-sign for 2.
No, McDavid will do 4. He won't do 2.
I don't know about that. I'm not
so sure. 2 years, I'm going to say this right now. It won't be 2 because the problem is that the conversations about him will get even louder. And the Oilers don't want that. And quite frankly, probably McDavid is not going to want that much.
It'll be at least 4. At least 4 for
you. Might as well, honestly, at that point, if Connor McDavid gets dealt, it's going to be almost a bolt out of the blue.
I mean, here's
how it would happen. It wouldn't be a case of 2-year deal, because then the conversation, it's always going to be hovering PTSD from Gretzky, whatever. But my feeling is that if Connor McDavid is ever dealt, it's going to be like, bam, it happens. And it's even, he's just like, quietly, and then they make that move. My read on the whole situation is he's likely to remain an Oiler as long as they are competitive. There's things that the Oilers that they need to do in order to keep themselves in the mix. And again, at the moment, they've got the last 2 years behind them. There's a lot of 2 Stanley Cup final runs here. So there's really at this point no reason for him to want to move on yet. He's just sending a signal that, hey, we need to push now. Yeah. And we need to get the right we need to get the right people in now. I think a lot of good things in the Oiler lineup, but there's things that still need tweaking.
Yeah, I mean, Guerin's he's going after Kaprizov to keep him. Like, where exactly would Kaprizov go that's going to be better, honestly, where he's going to make more money and be better? I'm not sure there's a location.
I don't think so either. When you're in Minnesota, I think it's a good spot. It's just a matter of, again, you're waiting a little bit on Jiricek. You think Jiricek might be a key component to that blue line, along with Buehm. The goaltending, I think, is solid there. There's the makings of a team that can be up the ladder. It's just
part of the calculation with Rossi and why they don't want to sign him for as much as he is asking for is because they want to keep their powder dry for Kaprizov. But but the thing is, it's like, you would think if it's about making the most money, he stays in Minnesota. If it's about not wanting to play in Minnesota anymore, then it's, we heard
I haven't gotten that vibe.
I think early on people were discussing that. I think early on people were discussing that, guys, with
I think that's moved away.
I don't get that. I'm in the same boat there. I don't have that same feeling now. I think Kaprizov's looking at the situation and going, it's a pretty good squad around me here. And the key thing is going to be the Rossi thing has to be.
He's going to be the 2-year deal. That's what
I'm saying. Rossi's going to be the 2-year deal. But again, that's a circumstance where you're just like, I get it. You still have to prove something here.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what happens in this circumstance, because as we said when we talked with Jesse Pierce on Wednesday, when I asked her, I said, is it untenable at this point? And it's not a case it's untenable. It's just a case where it's a marriage of convenience here for both sides at the end of the day.
Yeah, and they brought in Tarasenko. Like, I think they know Guerin knows what he's doing there. I think that's not really an issue. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. That's it for Off the Post. We'll catch everybody next time.
Take care, everybody.